Hey, welcome back, my friends. On today's episode, we're continuing the repairs on this 2007 CRF 450R, and I pulled the carburetor off of it. It smells like it's got the same fuel in it since 2007. Been sitting a while. I've had a couple of comments saying that I should do a full FCR rebuild, so that's what today's episode is about. We're going to go ahead and do a full rebuild, including mid-body, on this FCR carburetor. Stay tuned. The inside of the carburetor doesn't look fantastically bad. The outside is horrific. So first thing I need to do is take this thing through the car wash. Alright, we got most of the big chunks off of it. We will obviously do finer detail cleaning once we get the carburetor apart. And that's our next step. Alright, we're going to get digging into this FCR. One thing I want to make note is if these bikes have been sitting for a little while, pull out your petcock. In this case, Honda has like a remote reservoir out of the tank, and there's a filter that goes on here, and this thing was just destroyed. So you waste a lot of time cleaning your carburetor, and even though you drain the fuel out, you could be running any kind of debris that's in the tank back into your freshly clean carburetor. And this is what it's supposed to look like. So always check that before we get into digging into these things. Yeah, you're definitely going to need a Phillips head. If you're doing mid-body gaskets in these things, you're going to need a special security Torx bit to get the mid-body apart. Hot start plunger. We'll take our enrichment circuit plunger out. A lot of people call it a choke. It's not necessarily a choke. On the old school carburetors, on the back of the carburetor, there was a little flap that would close, and that would actually choke off the air supply to the engine. That's why they called it a choke. This is basically an enrichment circuit. When you pull this out, it draws air in through one of the holes in the inlet of the carburetor, and since the slide is closed, there's a lot of vacuum being pulled here, and it will pull air around this plunger. And down in the bottom of the bowl here, there's a pickup for extra fuel that enriches the circuit. These are just vent hoses. We'll go ahead and pull these off. These are in good shape. They're actually pretty soft. Usually they're hardened up, dried up, crusted up, and we'll just replace them. But these here, we'll reuse them. Next, we'll remove our low speed screw. Inside here, there's a spring, a washer, and a small O-ring. I've got an extremely small pick with a little curve on the end of it that I can get in here and fish this stuff out with, if they're even in there. And finish taking the bowl off. Sometimes these are a little tight. If you can grab the head with a pair of pliers and just break them loose. The kit comes with new screws, so we'll replace those. There's definitely a lot of corrosion inside of here. This gasket is barely rubber anymore. It's like hard plastic almost. We'll take apart the accelerator pump. Now, your kit may not come with this or any of these parts, so be careful. There's a spring in here and a diaphragm. Well, the kit should have come with it because this thing is no good. This is a quick access cap for changing out your main and pilot jetting. It has been messed with a little bit. The way I can tell is the flange is kind of bent up. When you over tighten these things, you just need to just tighten them. People snug these things down to like 173.9 foot-pounds, and it will break this collar right off, or at least bend it up. So now I want to point out in here why I always stress using non-ethanol fuel in carbureted vehicles. This corrosion is all due to ethanol fuel and its hydrophilic properties, which cause it to attract and mix with water. And when that happens with aluminum, you get corrosion. This one's not terrible. We'll definitely be able to clean it. But it just goes to show, try to use non-ethanol if you have the ability to do so. Now, if you can get an ultrasonic cleaner, this is the best case scenario because you can soak all your parts. I purchased this brand, Digital Pro. I don't remember if it was the Jungle website or the auction website, but honestly, it didn't last very long. The ultrasonic head started going out pretty quick on it. I think I got a few uses. I don't know if I just got a bad one or whatever, but I'm still going to use the tank because it's a nice big tank. I can soak everything in. So the cleaners I'm going to be using for soaking, and they're the same thing. One's just a spray and one is just a liquid. It is a Motorcraft Carburetor Tune-Up Cleaner. The liquid is a PM3, and the spray is a PM2. This stuff stinks, but it's an extremely effective cleaner. It's not harsh on plastic, aluminum, rubber, anything. Now, if the ultrasonic cleaner was working, I'd go ahead and let that run in there. It'll still work, it just takes more time. These gaskets are hard as a rock. If you're wondering about this kit, it's a Hercules Impact bit kit, a bit kit, and I got it from Harbor Freight. It's like 20 bucks. And then when they have the coupons, you can get a little bit more off of it. This is your needle retainer. This is what I'm talking about, one of the security bits. It's a Torx bit, got a hole in the middle of it. Now, a lot of times what goes wrong with these carburetors is these rollers get worn out. The bearings inside get worn out. So on some of these carburetors, this little metal plate can actually go either direction. This particular one, it cannot because of these little nubs, which is great. So you can always put it back the correct way. But on some carburetors, you got to be careful because if you flip this upside down, it will not run correctly. Looking down inside the carb body, these slides can get extremely worn as well, and it'll allow air to bypass, in which case you're going to have to replace the carburetor. You'll get a new needle with your kit. Sometimes they'll come with a new seat. The seats on these are not replaceable. Some of them screw in, some of them are held in with a screw. These are your floats. One thing you want to check with these, give them a little shake, make sure there's no fuel. If these were to crack or breach in one way or another, fuel would get inside of them, then they would not work properly. They wouldn't be efficient. This was more common on the older copper style. These new plastic ones, I don't think I've ever seen one with fluid or fuel inside of it. 7mm socket. We'll get your main jet out. I'm going to throw this into soak. Yeah, but we're just going to definitely run it across what should be in here. Make sure nobody's done any weird jetting stuff. 8mm. Take this guide tube out. And I'll also take this plastic diffuser. Now you got a couple of different holes here. The center hole is your main jet hole. Goes right up into the body of the carburetor. This main jet is responsible for supplying fuel from about 1/8 throttle to full throttle. Secondly, there's a nub right in here. This is your accelerator pump nozzle. So as your accelerator pump pumps the fuel from the bowl, it's going to go into this little hole, which goes up and squirts into the throat of the carburetor just to give it a little bit of extra punch, because these have a tendency to bog if you crack them wide open without any enrichment of fuel. This hole right here is your main inlet for your fuel, and that is your seat. If this is badly damaged, you're going to need to replace the carburetor. I don't think they sell anything to do any repairs or replacements on these. Now, if it's just lightly damaged, you can take some metal polishing compound on a Q-tip and get in there and clean that out a little bit, and that might help your needle to reseat again. This little jet right here is for your enrichment circuit we talked about earlier. So the bigger the jet on this one, the more fuel it will allow when you enrich in the circuit. This jet here is your pilot jet, and this is generally from idle to about 1/8 throttle. This will come into play. This is where your low speed screw goes. So the air basically comes in through the back of this, through this needle, and through this little pinhole in the throat of the carburetor. The amount of fuel that actually comes through is adjusted by this screw. The more you loosen the screw, the more fuel it will allow. And I'm going to spray a little bit in here so you can see how that comes out through there. That's your main jet. And as you can see, that's coming all the way through. If I block this, it will come all the way through to the inside. Well, part of the problem that we've got here is some should be coming out of here as well, but I'm assuming that pilot jet is going to be semi-blocked, clogged. It's a very, very tiny opening, and it doesn't take much to block it up. So with all that corrosion, I'm sure this thing is blocked. So we'll soak it, blow through it, soak it, blow through it. If we can't get it clean, we'll just go ahead and replace it. They're fairly inexpensive. At this point, we're going to take the mid body off, and there's a ton of little gaskets in there that we need to deal with. And this is filthy in here, but there are some more of these security Torx bits, 1, 2, and 3, and 4, that you're going to need to get this out. These can be tight, so if you use a cheaper set, you're probably going to snap your bit. Once our screws are out, we can go ahead and separate our mid body. And there are a ton of little gaskets in there as well. And then there's some under this ring as well we have to take off. That's another little tiny, tiny bit inside of there. Just for reference, this is going to be a T20 for the mid-body security Torx, and a 2mm hex for the small ones. Yeah, these rubber pieces are not soft and flexible. And this is probably going to cause you carburetor issues. I mean, if you don't get into doing all this, you may end up like me on the YZ project, you know what I mean? That's especially true when these things have been sitting for a long time. Some of these inlets are removable, and there'll be some O-rings in there. Some of them are not. I'm not able to get this out. It's tight, and it is grinding. It feels like it's going to break. I'm going to soak this, and if over time I can get that loose, I'd like to do that and replace those O-rings. I'm going to go ahead and pull the throttle position sensor. I'm going to go ahead and make a mark so I know where the center of the screw is. Otherwise, I'm going to have to throw a meter on it and get it all dialed in. So if it was right, we'll try to put it back to where it was. If not, I have to do the adjustment. And that's as far as I'm going to disassemble this body. There is a seal in here. I don't see it in the kit, so I'm not going to mess with that. And I will go ahead and clean this out real good with my PM2. I'm just going to run my PM2 through every single one of these passages, make sure everything's super clean. Don't neglect this nozzle for your accelerator pump. This thing is a tiny, tiny hole. This can get blocked up as well, and it'll cause you some performance issues. So make sure we blow through all of this. Can't get down to these little cracks and crevices. Throw a Q-tip on a drill with a little bit of your PM2. Just lightly work it. Alright, the jets they got in here is a 178 main. That's stock. And then they got a 50 pilot jet, which is way too much. They call for 42. So I'm going to put this back to stock jetting, 178, 42. Now that you get everything clean, lay everything out in front of you so you can make sure you have everything that you need. Then we can start reassembling this carburetor. Get yourself some Permatex dielectric grease. This is good to hold these O-rings in place. For example, an O-ring like this, all you need is just a little bit on your fingers. Just wipe it on the gasket. You don't want any excess that could block ports. Just want to put a little sheen on the seal. And the reason you do that is when you put your O-ring on, it'll just hold it in place so it's not walking out on you. On these small screws, we're going to put a little touch of thread locker. Make sure none of your seals moved. And we'll join the mid body to the upper body. Going to get a little bit of a dab of grease on these shaft bearings. Make sure that this cover is sitting flush. And with this particular carburetor, it's only going to go in one way. Little blue Loctite. Now this is not going to be a tuning video, so we'll just continue to put it back together. We just want to have a glisten on it, no excess. Got a new 42 Pilot. And a new 178 main. Now you want to set your float level according to manufacturer's specifications. You want to check your service manual to see what the float height should be and how they want you to measure it. I can tell already by looking at this, this is not the correct needle. You can see how much taller it is compared to the old one. Well, it's a lucky day. I looked through my carb parts and I had another needle. Correct the one. You can see a huge difference now, but this is definitely out of spec. The way you want to make this adjustment is, if you've got the carburetor upside down, that little pin is collapsed. And that's incorrect. You want it to be just on its side, so the float is just starting to touch the pin. And then you're going to measure from the deck to the highest point of the float. They want 8 millimeters. As you can see, the float is definitely not adjusted properly, and this fuel level will be too high in the bowl. The way we adjust that is this little metal tab. It's as simple as bending it up or down, and I can see it's bent sort of up. So somebody's trying to get this thing a lot richer than it needed to be for some reason. The float level was too high, the jetting was too high. And if you can see that, the float level is just about even. With our 8 millimeter mark to the top. FCR carburetors are not too terribly picky about float level height unless they're way off. Now at this point we can put our bowl back on. This is what I was talking about. As you can see, down inside there you have access to your pilot jet and your main jet for quick changes without having to pull the whole carburetor out. Again, you don't need to crank these things up, just seat them. If your hot start plunger is corroded or damaged or rusted, they sell a kit. Just go ahead and replace it. Point of fact, these plastic nuts suck. They do sell CNC ones on the auction website, fairly inexpensive. It's a nice little upgrade. Lastly, we get our low speed adjustment needle. Put a little dielectric on the O-ring, and the kit comes with a new spring, washer, and O-ring. I want to turn this in just till it seats, very lightly. Don't crank it in. You break the tip of the needle off. A lot of times what people will do is they'll tighten them up so much that that tip of that needle will break off and get stuck in that port, and you'll never get this thing to idle properly. So just when you feel it, and go by your manufacturer's recommendations on a starting point. I don't think you can go wrong with 2 turns out, 2 1/4 turns out, and then just dial it in once you get your engine warmed up. I'll go with 2 turns. And as it turns out, it's just that easy to do an FCR rebuild on these Keihin carburetors. Now granted, this one wasn't super bad. I've seen some that have been sitting for years with ethanol in them, and the bowl is just so corroded, or the inside of the carburetor is just so corroded that you can't use it. So in that case, you're going to have to be looking for a used carburetor. I honestly don't think it's justifiable what the manufacturers try to charge for these carburetors, anywhere from $800 to $1,200, and maybe even up from there to do a replacement carburetor for this. No wonder people are buying Chinese stuff when you can get a Chinese carburetor that bolts right on, seems to work pretty good for 86 bucks. So, but if yours is in good shape, you can keep the OEM stuff. The rebuild kits for these things are $20 to $40 with all the gaskets and seals. It does not come with an accelerator pump kit, as you can see, so that's something that has to be purchased separately. Anyway, I hope this was informative. Hope I didn't miss anything or leave anything out. If I did, throw it down in the comments and I'll answer it for you. Sometimes when you get going on this, I might forget to mention some things, but that's basically it. Appreciate you guys watching. Appreciate all the support you guys have given me. It's a fun journey. We'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.